TRADCAST Express. TRADCAST Express, it's Friday, February 13th, 2026. Boy, has it been a busy last 2 weeks. Hours after the last TRADCAST Express episode was published, the Society of St. Pius X announced on February 2nd that they would ordain a new batch of bishops on July 1st of this year, without the approval of Leo XIV, if necessary. This move is not surprising and had been expected at least since the death of Bishop Bernard Tissier de Malaray in October of 2024, because since then the SSPX has only had 2 bishops left to serve their ever-growing fraternity, which is active in over 70 countries in the world and on every continent. The problem the society is facing is that, according to church law, the 1983 Novus Ordo Code of Canon Law, under which the Vatican is operating and which the SSPX also accepts, at least for the most part, to ordain a bishop or several bishops without a mandate from the Pope to do so incurs the gravest possible penalty: immediate, automatic excommunication. The technical term for the punishment is excommunication latae sententiae. It's incurred ipso facto, meaning simply by committing the forbidden act, in this case, the consecration of bishops. This means that the SSPX bishops would basically excommunicate themselves by means of the unlawful consecration, because latae sententiae means that it is an automatic sentence, not imposed on them by an ecclesiastical judge in a trial after both prosecution and defense have each presented their arguments, but without such a tribunal, automatically. Now, this situation isn't new for the Society of St. Pius X, because this very thing happened once before, namely on June 30th, 1988, when after endless and ultimately fruitless talks and negotiations with the Vatican, the group's founder, the French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, went ahead and consecrated 4 bishops for the SSPX, not merely without the mandate of John Paul II, but in direct defiance of John Paul's order not to carry out these ordinations. Lefebvre was joined by another bishop for the conferral of these ordinations, and that was Bishop Antonio de Castro Mayer, retired ordinary of the Diocese of Campos, Brazil. Both Lefebvre and de Castro Mayer died in 1991, Lefebvre on March 25th and de Castro Mayer on April 25th. 2 of those bishops consecrated in 1988 are still alive today: Alfonso de Galarreta and Bernard Fillet. It is these 2 who would carry out the episcopal consecrations announced for July 1st by the SSPX Superior General, Father Davide Pagliarani. Not surprisingly, it didn't take long for the Vatican to react to the February 2nd announcement of new SSPX bishops. The following day, the spokesman for the Vatican press office, Matteo Bruni, told reporters, quote, "Contacts between the Society of St. Pius X and the Holy See are ongoing, with the aim of avoiding ruptures or unilateral approaches to the issues that have arisen," unquote. On February 4th, Bruni said that there would be an informal and personal dialogue between Cardinal Victor Fernandez, prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and Father Pagliarani in Rome on Thursday, February 12th. And so it happened. But if the Society of St. Pius X thought that the Vatican would seriously take into consideration approving candidates for episcopal ordination, they were quite mistaken. Fernandez was pretty clear that if there is to be any kind of dialogue going forward, the scheduled consecrations would have to be called off. A one-page statement released by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith shortly after the meeting included the following. Quote, "After clarifying certain points presented by the FSSPX in various letters, particularly those sent between 2017 and 2019, among other matters, discussion concerned the question of the divine will regarding the plurality of religions, the prefect proposed a specifically theological dialogue process with a well-defined methodology concerning themes that still lack sufficient clarification, such as the difference between an act of faith and religious submission of mind and will, or the different degrees of assent required by various texts of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council and its interpretation. At the same time, he proposed addressing a series of topics listed by the FSSPX in a letter dated January 17, 2019. The purpose of this process would be to highlight, in the debated topics, the minimum requirements necessary for full communion with the Catholic Church, and consequently to outline a canonical status for the fraternity, together with other aspects requiring further study. It was reiterated on the part of the Holy See that the ordination of bishops without a mandate from the Holy Father, who holds ordinary supreme power that is full, universal, immediate, and direct, would imply a decisive rupture of ecclesial communion, schism, with grave consequences for the fraternity as a whole. Therefore, the possibility of carrying out this dialogue presupposes that the fraternity suspend the announced decision regarding episcopal ordinations. The Superior General of the FSSPX will present the proposal to his council and will give his response to the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith." Unquote.
Bam!
Bam! Yup, it's pretty clear that Leo XIV intends to play hardball. I mean, this was written by Fernandez, but of course he does so representing Leo XIV. In fact, just a few days ago, on February 9th, Leo received Fernandez in audience, and it was probably to discuss and approve these very conditions. In any case, with the Vatican issuing their own press release so quickly after the meeting, they certainly got to shape the narrative. The SSPX did also release a communiqué of their own that day, but not until much later. In their own statement, they pretty much confirmed what Fernandez had proposed, but they added one interesting detail. Quote, "The Cardinal stated orally that while it would be possible to engage in dialogue about the Council, its texts could not be corrected." Unquote. Obviously. I don't know if the SSPX was seriously hoping for a revision or correction of Vatican II, but if so, then they didn't think this through very well. What would it do to traditional Roman Catholic teaching if the Church could one day say, you know what, even though our last ecumenical council taught XYZ, we now realize, after talking to a certain priestly society about it, that this was really not correct, and we hereby repudiate this teaching and replace it with its opposite. But don't worry, this time we got it right. Promise. Oh yeah, and if you still dare to adhere to the old teaching, as we obliged you to do as recently as yesterday, if you still believe that, then you're in heresy, or at least in mortal sin. Now, this shows that the SSPX's recognize and resist position is absurd, because even if they could get what they ultimately want, which is the conversion of the hierarchy back to the pre-Vatican II Catholic religion, then the result here would still be incompatible with the Catholic faith. They have an impossible position, the SSPX, and what makes it so absurd is that they absolutely insist on recognizing the neo-modernists in Rome as the true and valid Roman Catholic hierarchy. That is what throws a monkey wrench into everything. If only they could finally accept that if there's a false religion afoot in Rome, with false doctrines and false sacramental rites and harmful laws and false saints and false marriage annulments, if all of that is so, it is possible only because there is also a false pope. By holding these counterfeit popes and other hierarchs to be legitimate, the Lefebvres are ascribing all of these horrendous diabolical lies and heresies and sacrileges that are perpetrated through official acts to the Immaculate Bride of Christ, the Holy Catholic Church, rather than to the counterfeit church that has obviously eclipsed the Roman Catholic Church of Pope Pius XII and his predecessors. Yes, I know. The question then becomes, so how do we get a true pope again then? And that is perfectly legitimate to ask. And I don't have a really good, satisfying answer. But what doesn't make sense is for people to say that sedevacantism cannot be true because then we don't really know how to get a pope ever again, while at the same time they are adhering to a position that makes getting a pope, even though possible and very easily so, makes it completely pointless in the first place. Because if Leo XIV, Francis, Benedict XVI, and the others, if these men were true popes, and all of the evils that they produced could really come from the Catholic Church, then what would we need a pope for? What would we need such a church for? Because then it's obviously not the Ark of Salvation, and then the Pope isn't the vicar of Christ, but of Judas. And so we see once again that whether or not the Vatican II popes are true popes or not makes all the difference in the world. In any case, to get back to the SSPX Rome dialogue, well, right now, the ball is in the court of the Society of St. Pius X. In the words of American baseball legend Yogi Berra, it's déjà vu all over again. What will Father Pagliarani do? After consulting with his counsel, in my opinion, he will tell Fernandez, thanks, but no thanks. Because beginning a dialogue with the post-Catholic Vatican in 2026 is obviously a fool's errand. Leo, Fernandez, and their other henchmen are so much farther removed from Catholicism today than even their predecessors were in 1988. I mean, does anyone really think that Fernandez will be able to clarify doctrinal matters in such a way that the SSPX will no longer find them objectionable, without the Vatican repudiating any of its obvious errors? Has it really all been simply a matter of misunderstanding of things that only need to be clarified? And do they really think that reconciliation with the Vatican II Church will happen fast enough for them to be able to keep going with only 2 elderly bishops for the time being? Do they really think that Leo XIV or his successor will give a mandate for the consecration of candidates they will find acceptable every time? Let's not kid ourselves. The Vatican's proposal for dialogue is basically dead on arrival. Now, lastly, just as I was preparing the script for this podcast, the SSPX went on offense and published on their official news site a provocative but not unjustified salvo against the Vatican entitled, "Can the SSPX be forbidden to do what is permitted to the Chinese Communist Party?" In this post, for which no author is given, the Society makes the case that if the Vatican has so much mercy and tolerance for the state-run Chinese church, which is ruled by the Communist Party, to the point of even accepting their unilateral appointment and consecration of diocesan bishops, on the grounds that it is better that way for the good of souls, then why can't the Vatican extend the same courtesy to the SSPX, which has as its stated goal not the curtailing or controlling of the Catholic faith, but its preservation and defense? That is, of course, a legitimate question. When the Chinese communists began consecrating their own bishops in defiance of the Vatican, Pope Pius XII responded by instituting an automatic excommunication for the consecration of bishops that have been neither nominated nor approved by the Holy See. And what does the modernist-occupied unholy see do today in the same situation? They accept the communists' unilateral move and ratify the new bishops, all the while using a heavy hand with the Lefebvrists. Why the double standard? Is it because today's post-Catholic Vatican has a lot more in common with the Chinese communists than with the Society of St. Pius X? If so, then the Vatican's message to the SSPX is loud and clear. If you want to have new bishops with Leo XIV's approval, you'll just have to consecrate a bunch of communists. TRADCAST Express is a production of Novus Ordo Watch. Check us out at tradcast.org, and if you like what we're doing, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution at novusordowatch.org/donate.